So how are you, Peter?
Morning. Yeah, good. Well, thank you. Good week?
It's been, you know how last week, and I'm not looking for sympathy, but last week my man flu was just starting to kick in.
Yes.
Well, this week, today, it's just starting to kind of disappear. But it's been, honestly, you know what it's like when you're self-employed and you get a cold and you've just got to kind of plough on because you can't cancel all your jobs and all that sort of thing. It's been a busy week in the workshop.
I saw on your Instagram you'd got your Art Deco inspired, fireplace surround put in.
Yeah, so that's all done and dusted. So I'll run through the jobs that I'm working on at the minute. So I've done the fireplace surround, or the fire surround, which was like an Art Deco piece that I had to design and completely make for the customer and then install.
I'm never entirely sure how much MDF they had in the Art Deco period, but you know.
I pulled out a Victorian one and that was made of MDF. I got that done, and then the other work that I'm working on now is a whole set of exhibition stands for an exhibition that's coming up in June, and I've got 8 exhibition stands, quite big, bulky things that I need to build.
That sounds like fun. Are they flat packed and then all put together with knockdown fixings?
Yeah, exactly. So they all have to be designed because they're basically going to run in a big row, and 8 of them are going to be joined together. So they all have to be very kind of sleek and white, and almost that you don't notice them because these have to support various bits of display stuff, and the stands have to just kind of blend into the background, so they have to look very clean and sleek and all that sort of thing, but they have to be dismantleable so that I can actually get them to site. At the moment I'm building all those, and it's a kind of project where it would be lovely to build it completely and then just leave them assembled, because every time you take them to bits, you know, things change when you put them back together, and cracks appear that weren't there before.
And there's wear and tear on the knockdown fixings and all that sort of stuff. So,
but for this, that's just not going to be practical because they have to be moved twice before they end up to the final, because they have to be set up in a kind of pre-exhibition staging area first, where they're going to kind of test everything, and then they get moved over to the final exhibition area. So they have to really be easily moved. So that's one project. I've got a set of double doors and a door frame to fit for a customer. I've got 2 full understair cupboard units to fit with kind of slide out, pulley out drawers for shoe storage and all that sort of thing. You know, your kind of diagonal. So I've got 2 of them to design and build. I've got 2 full sets of built-in alcove units to design and build. I've got various floating shelves to do. And then coupled with all sorts of other smaller little jobs and stuff, that's me pretty much booked up until June at the minute. I'm not taking on anything extra until I've cleared down this backlog. So at the moment, I'm in this kind of frustrating position where people are phoning up asking us to do stuff, and I'm having to literally say, look, I'm not even going to come out and do a quote because I can't give you any reasonable estimate of the timescale of when I can actually come out. It might be June, it might be May if I get on really quickly with all this other stuff. Equally, it could be July or August. So I don't like booking stuff in that far in advance, you know.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I know a couple of guys on Twitter who are, you know, in the business, and they're booking 2019 now.
Really?
This year's gone, and they're booking into next year. And, you know, people will wait. You know, if you do what they want and they're happy with what you do, people will wait for you, I've found.
I think it's the thing that makes me nervous about booking too far in advance, and I generally try not to go more than about, I would say, between 3 and 6 months. I mean, you can give someone a kind of vague, I'll try and book you in for maybe January 2019 or the early part of 2019. But I find if you try to be any more accurate than that, it's opening yourself up to a lot of headaches with calendars shifting around, and not just on your side but on the customer side.
No, indeed, because they have holidays and, you know, half-term weeks and all that stuff. I'm out of the school sort of holiday loop completely now because my kids are grown away, as they say. You can tell when the traffic quietens down that it's half-term. You think, oh yeah, right, okay. People are away being busy with their kids and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely. So as long as the work is continuing to come in, which touch wood it is at the minute, I prefer to keep it the time scales a little bit shorter.
It's kind of reachable then, isn't it? It's, if you start, I mean, I'm like you, I don't like to plan that far ahead because, life happens and you might want to do something else. Anything more than about 6 months ahead, and I'd start to feel like, hang on, my life's sort of, getting planned out too far in advance. 3 to 6 months, as you say, is just the sweet spot for me. And even then you'll find that, I don't know about you, but I find people have no concept of how long things take to actually build and put together. In fact, I've stopped using the word lead time. I've said waiting list now because people don't seem to have many people don't seem to have a concept of lead time. So, it's 3 to 6 month lead time. Oh, so I'll phone you in 3 to 6 months then. No, if you do that, then there'll be another, 3 to 6 months after that. People do seem to expect you to drop everything and come running to service their need. I blame Amazon. The next day delivery has soured everybody's idea of what's achievable and what's sensible.
It's strange. I got a call just like that the other day, and I don't publish my phone number. If it looks like the pipeline's starting to run low, I'll pop it back on my website. But especially like now, where at the moment I don't want people to phone us because I'm only going to be telling them, for the best will in the world. And I know for a fact that if someone phones up with a dream job, I'm going to try and fit it in, and then I'll just get stressed about it. Whereas if I just don't know about it, and then they can potentially phone us in 3 months' time once I've cleared down the backlog a bit, I'm a bit more comfortable about that. So I tend to be quite fluid about whether or not I'm putting my phone number out there. But somehow someone had got my phone number randomly. I don't know how, because it's not on anything that I'm aware of at the minute, but they phoned us up, and I can't remember what it was. It was some tiny job, and it was like, can you come out this Saturday in the evening after 7 o'clock to do the work? And it was like,
no,
and
just no,
But for it, and it was, as I say, it wasn't even it was like a tiny job, like rehanging a door or something.
It wasn't a proper job.
Yeah, and it was like, no, I can't come out with 2 days' notice on a Saturday evening and destroy my weekend. But there were times where I probably would have taken that on, but not now.
Topic of the week, I guess, then, following on from this, is probably a good idea to talk about maybe how we go about finding work, how we go about keeping customers, and maybe how you got your first job. Because in last week's podcast, if the listener hasn't had a chance to listen to that one, and you really should, we talked about how we got started and how we arrived here. And it might well be worth having a quick chat about how we go about finding our customers, how we go about finding the work, and how we go about keeping the customers happy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one to get our teeth into, because I think it's probably one of the most common thing for people looking to get into any trade, and especially into the joinery business and the carpentry side of things. So
we said last week we both came to this business, came to where we are through a slightly unconventional route, surprisingly similar and yet surprisingly different. We've arrived doing what we do, and I picked up my first job, my first bit of work, by putting cards through people's doors. Again, it was the classic, stand at your front door or you're in your back garden and have a look half a mile in each direction, a square mile total. An awful lot of homes, offices, shops, houses, flats, whatever else in there that needs some work doing. So I just started, I had some cards printed. When I started the business, I called myself Handyman for Hire, and had some little cutesy cards printed, and I just sort of, walked the streets, shoving them through people's doors, and got my first job out of it. It took a couple of weeks of pounding the pavements, but you had this sort of slight fantasy that maybe if I start putting cards through, people's doors at this end of the street, I'll get my first job before I get to the other end of the street. But that didn't quite happen. But I certainly got my first job out of it, and it rolled along from there.
If there's one thing I've learned, is that there's no logic to where or when work will come in. Again, it's coming back to the whole calendar management thing, but planning for when work is going to come in and what you're going to do in the quiet periods, because you do get periods where the phone just doesn't ring, and you start checking is the website still online? Is my phone working? Is everything all right? And you start getting to that point where the pipeline's starting to dry up a little bit, but then generally everything comes back, and it's all very random.
I've learned just to enjoy those quiet times. Give yourself a chance to clean the workshop out and have a tidy up. Take stock of everything, of where you are, rejig your website if that's what you need to do. There's all. Or start doing stuff around the home. Score some brownie points for the missus, because there's always stuff that needs doing. There's always. I guarantee the best way to make the phone start ringing or the emails to start coming in is either to start a reasonably large size project at home, or book a holiday. Those are the triggers I've found. As soon as you book a holiday, there's a big job coming in that needs your attention.
That seems to be a marketing method that works really, really well, I've found. Same here. So where did you go on from that? So obviously you picked up some work from the Leaflet Drop and all that sort of thing.
That's right, yeah. Put cards through doors. And then, I think I mentioned last week, coming from the photographic side of things, advertising is actually, compared to the photographic side, was incredibly cheap. So I advertised in just about anything and everything. Small, local, little directories. There were a couple around at the time. The website was less relevant back then, I think. We're going back sort of 18 years or so. So I got less work through Google searches and that sort of thing, or less inquiries. But certainly, little bits of print media, tried local advertising, yellow pages, all the usual routes really, but far and away the best results I had came from just popping cards through the doors. And then once you start, then you can get recommendations. Once you start, you do a good job, you do it on time, you can string. My sort of, little sort of ethos was that, well, if you can string a sentence together in English, turn up on time and do a decent job for the price that you've quoted, then you're kind of ahead of the pack, generally speaking, given the overall state of the trades. I think everybody's kind of upped their game a little bit over the last 18 years, and everybody does that little bit better these days, which is great because everybody gets a more professional job. But that's how it really took off for me. And it all came from, leaflet drops and cards through doors and that sort of thing.
You're 100% correct on you just have to turn up and actually bother getting back to people. And people are, you're already in the top 10% if you've bothered to do that. And that is definitely still the case now. And I get customers where I've not even been able to turn up and do a quote for maybe 2 months. I've said that from the outset, I'll book you in for a quote in 2 months' time. There's no point in me pricing it up now this second because I know I can't do the work for a while. But they're happy with that. And then I'll go out and do the quote in 2 months' time, and I'll apologise and just say, look, really sorry it's taken us this long to actually do the quote. And they're just like, you're the only person who actually got back to us anyway. So they're over the moon that I've just, A, got back to them, and B, actually turned up to do the quote.
Exactly that. I've got a long-standing client. We've agreed that we're doing less and less work together now because they still think of me as the handyman who does little bits and pieces. And I've had to say, look, I don't really do this sort of little odds and ends anymore. But he rang me. I had a trapped nerve in my arm, in my elbow. I had to go and have surgery on it. We're going back, quite a way now, 10, 12 years, something like that. And he rang me sort of a couple of days before I was going in to have this done and said, look, I'm going to be out of action for 6 weeks. I'm happy to give you an idea of costs, but it's going to be at least 2 to 3 months before I can get this done for you. And it was a silly thing. He'd worked, he's a film director actually, now works in television. He lives in Los Angeles now, he's doing very well. And he'd had a friend of his had made him some very nice but very simple plywood shelves, and he needed them cutting down so they could go on a wall in an alcove. And he couldn't find anybody to do them. He said he'd called, half a dozen carpentry, joinery firms, and literally nobody had got back to him. Oh, we'll have to get back to you with an idea. We'll send somebody out, and never heard again. So I was the only person who got back with a straight answer. I went and had a quick look, gave him a rough idea of cost, and said it's going to be 2 to 3 months. And he said, "Great, I'll wait." And since then, I did the post surgery. I got back to full fitness, did the job. I've been doing sort of regular bits and pieces for them ever since then. So yeah, it doesn't take much to impress, fortunately. Otherwise, I'd be out of a job. But, you know, as I say, turning up on time, stringing a sentence together in English and doing a decent job and being straight with people goes an awful long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being upfront about things like costs from square one as well. I find a lot of tradespeople that I've dealt with in the past, getting a price out of them is like getting blood out of a stone. You know, it's like the costs sometimes don't get mentioned at all until the job's completely done and dusted and they're about to walk out the door. And it's like, you kind of feel rude as a customer asking, so how much is that going to be? Yet I never want to put the customer in that position. I always try to get there first to say, this is a rough idea of what the job's going to cost, because a lot of the time as well, they have a completely unrealistic expectation of what a job's going to cost because they're not joiners and they don't do this on a daily basis. Sometimes they'll think incredibly complicated jobs are going to be incredibly cheap, and sometimes they think incredibly simple jobs are going to be really expensive. It goes both ways.
Yeah,
but
it's usually the first one, isn't it?
It is, usually. But you've got to put that across from the very, very outset, because sometimes you can spend hours and hours planning in work, doing the quote, doing rough designs for projects, and you'll get that across to the customer, and it'll come as a total surprise to them that a project that they maybe thought was going to cost a couple of £100 is actually going to cost a couple of grand.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you couldn't even buy the wood for less than £1,000, you know.
This is the thing, the material costs are, you know, people, you know, the old joke about wood not growing on trees, but, you know, it really is expensive. Timber, certainly in our country, in Britain here, which is a wonderful country in so many ways, the cost of timber is extremely
for decent
high.
Timber, absolutely. So I always try to get a vague idea of the price of the project across to the customer. Well, you can kind of, after a while, you can kind of read the customer to a degree, whether you know what sort of expectation they're going to have. And for those sort of customers, you know, where you perhaps mention, okay, the next stage is that I'm going to design the solution for you. I need a deposit before designing a solution. And they're like, yes, fine, I'll transfer it now. And generally those sort of customers, they already have an expectation of what the project's going to cost. If they're happy to pay just for it to be designed or whatever, they're not going to grumble about the solution costing $2,000 or $3,000. Whereas there are some customers who will be like, oh, well, I want this built. Can you have it all done by tomorrow? They've probably got a slightly more unrealistic expectation of what's going to be involved in the project.
Yes. I've just done a couple of videos on my YouTube channel at 10minuteworkshop.tv where I talk about pricing, actually, and they're coming out over the next couple of weeks. And it's really interesting. I go through a job. I'm asking my customer, my subscribers, to try pricing it out themselves. So we'll see what comes in from that anyway. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, that'll be I'm looking forward to that. I think that'll be a really interesting one. So how do you handle getting from the stage of a customer saying they're interested in getting some work done? What's your process then through to actually doing the work?
Almost always it's either a message or an email that comes in first. Very, very rarely a phone call. And as soon as that happens, I get back to them, usually within 24 hours. Can't promise to do it straight away, but try and get back to them that day, assuming it's something I want to do. Give them a realistic idea of how much work I've got on. So if I've got 6 months work on, I say, you've caught me at a particularly busy time. I'm very happy to give you a ballpark idea of cost now, but I won't be able to start or complete the work within the next 6 months. Sometimes that kills the inquiry stone dead. Sometimes I never hear from them again. Sometimes they say, wow, okay, you're busy. Nice to be busy. Well, we'd be very interested in having an idea of cost. If that's the case, then what I tend to do is give them a ballpark idea. And I've got to say, I do have very rough guide prices on my website. I don't make them upfront and central so that they're obvious, but more so that people who are looking for them can find them. They're sort of attached to sample pictures in my picture photo gallery. So if somebody is looking for an alcove unit, there's an indication of cost in the description alongside that picture, and I make it very clear that it's a minimum. These are from, you know, X amount if it's an alcove unit. I make it very clear that all the nice things that you're probably going to want, those twiddly face frames and the, Victorian style panel doors with a mesh finish and soft close hinges and push to open drawers and all that, those are things that are going to bump up the price massively. Basically, but by giving people a sort of a bare minimum price, it does kind of weeds out, if you like, the folks who just don't realise what this sort of stuff costs. I've had people, there were phone calls actually, people phone and ask me if having something made would be more expensive than a Billy bookcase from IKEA, and you think, well, yeah, pretty much,
Yeah, and I have those sort of phone calls, and I generally say to people, unless you own your own forests and have a robot production line for making your furniture, then of course it's going to be more expensive than IKEA. Why would anyone think that a handmade, custom, bespoke piece of furniture would be cheaper than something that's literally built by robots out of the cheapest materials known to mankind? Sometimes people, and unfortunately, and again, this is another whole thing for another podcast, the IKEA debate, which I have a love-hate relationship with IKEA.
I was going to say, I'm sitting in a room full of IKEA. In fact, most of my rooms are full of IKEA.
Same here, but the problem with IKEA is that it's set an expectation, a completely false expectation of what furniture costs. That's my big problem. And I know they are trying to put across that message of making things that anyone can afford so that everyone can have nice stuff in their houses. And yeah, I buy into that argument to a degree. But the problem comes when people who do have the money to buy proper furniture made out of decent materials are buying IKEA furniture because it's essentially disposable. And I think that's a bigger problem with IKEA furniture, and the amount of IKEA furniture that I see. Literally, it's been bought, built once, taken to bits, everything's broken on it when they've taken it to bits, and it ends up in the tip. And I think that is a really, really bad model that the UK and the world is going down.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of IKEA. I think they're what they've done in terms of design and manufacturing is incredibly clever. I don't know about you. I've certainly built my fair share of IKEA stuff, and I've never, again, early on in the handyman days, I've never had one fail that wasn't being misused. I'm thinking about wardrobes or bookcases or that sort of thing. So, you put a PAX wardrobe together or whatever, and and it goes in the corner of the room, and it does the job. It does exactly what it's intended to do, and it only fails if somebody then tries to walk it across a room to the other corner without bracing it or taking it apart or whatever. You're putting unreasonable stresses on those joints then.
Is that an unreasonable stress, though? To want to be able to move your furniture?
If they do it unwisely, yeah, like trying to move a wardrobe on your own. I mean, I could do it, but
I think my problem with it, I hate chipboard, and the majority of stuff, or particle board, I think that is in the US, and the majority of IKEA furniture is made out of particle board, and the big problem with particle board is that as soon as you've put a screw into it, and you take the screw back out of it, putting a screw back into it again. So in other words, you've built it, you take it to bits to move house or whatever, and you're going to rebuild it. And that screw will never have a good fixing again because the particle board has gone.
Which is why they have these knockdown fixings, of course, the Cam and Dowell stuff and all that. That's where the...
And I have to say, if you're ever looking for the latest and greatest way of joining two bits of wood together, look at IKEA furniture, because they've come up with some amazingly clever ways of joining wood together. And I completely agree. The technologies that they've come up with for joining stuff together quickly and easily is phenomenal. And I do quite like doing the odd bit of flat pack now and then just to say, that's a clever way of doing that. I've never seen that before.
Yeah. I got to say, and again, I don't know about you, but some of the IKEA flat pack is so complicated. I've built a few, and some of the bigger drawer units, the amount of time you have to study those instructions. I don't know how ordinary, and I'm reasonably practical. I don't know how ordinary people do it. I really don't.
I've had flat pack projects for customers where they've tried and they've given up and they've called me out to do it. And I've said to them, unless you have proper joinery equipment, and not so much on the IKEA side, but for certain manufacturers who I'll not mention, but certain companies who also make flat pack furniture, unless you have actual woodworking equipment and potentially even a joinery workshop, you are going to struggle putting that together. For the best will in the world, it's not a DIY job.
Yeah, it's certainly beyond most mere mortals, most regular folks, yeah.
No, I've definitely come across that. How did we get onto IKEA? I've completely...
I don't know, actually. Rambled in there. Where were we? So, talking our way through a job. So once the initial inquiry has come in and I've stated my time schedule, if the people are happy with that, then we'll go along and I'll have a rough measure up, give them an idea of a price. Now, when I do that, I like to do a little drawing, a little sketch for myself. I don't share these with the clients at this stage. It's just visually, I like to draw it out so that I know what the sort of components are. I do an awful lot of the same type of work, alcove units and bookcases and fitted wardrobes and that sort of stuff. So I've got a pretty good idea of how tall and how deep and how wide a double wardrobe is, for example. But I still like to draw it out on a simple little 2D scale drawing just to give myself a good visual reference of it. And then from that, I can give them a broad brush stroke idea of costs, usually a minimum, depending on what they've said they wanted. If they know that they want soft close hinges and panel doors and all that sort of nicer stuff, then I'll include that. If they want a top box on the wardrobe, then I'll include that as well. And after that, once they've agreed a general idea of cost, it's not a firm quote, it's always an estimate, then I bill them for a deposit.
And what do you do for the drawing? At that stage, you're not showing the drawing to the customer?
No.
So that's just for yourself. And is that just done by hand, or...?
No, I do that on my laptop. I do that... I have a very old copy of OmniGraffle, which is a fairly clunky. It's a bit like Visio. It's more of a charting drawing program, really, but it works to scale. And there's a lot of muscle memory. There are probably many other better applications that I could do this with, but there's a lot of muscle memory in there with the keyboard shortcuts and everything. And I can bang out a very quick, simple little 2D plan to scale for my own reference very quickly. And often that just forms the basis of what I will show the customers nearer the time.
And then you take it forward to the deposit stage. So how does that work?
25% deposit to secure the job. It does depend on the size of the job, and it does depend on the customer. If it's somebody I've worked with before, then I may just let the deposit slide, and especially on a smaller job, I'll just bill them at the end of it. But for anything substantial and for anybody new, 25% deposit to make the booking, basically. 25% when work starts in the workshop. Another 25% when the installation starts, and the balance on completion.
Have you ever had a situation where you've taken the deposit and now you're getting into potentially putting a more detailed design together, and you've gone back to the customer and they're like, oh, well, that's kind of what we had in mind, but actually we want 17 sets of drawers going down this edge that are all soft close, and they hadn't told you about it?
I haven't actually, no. If they haven't told me about it, then they haven't told me about it and say, look, the original estimate was based on, and I do describe it. I don't give them the drawings, but I do describe it. It is a double fitted wardrobe, approximately 900 wide, 1900 high, 550 deep, with the internal layout to be agreed, but of the usual mix of hanging space and shelves, no drawers, for example, would be that one. Because, as you know, actually making drawer boxes with drawer slides and everything is very time consuming, and it really does bump the cost of these things up significantly. Yeah,
absolutely. No, I've never had that myself, but I'm intrigued as to whether or not that has come back to bite people at any point.
Hasn't happened to me, but yeah.
So then you obviously get the work all scheduled in, and you've got your deposit, and you can get all your materials, and you can get the work actually done. And then your final part, I suppose, is billing the client. How do you handle the actual client billing at the end of it?
Because there are scheduled payments throughout the process, it's all done by email. I email them an invoice, and invariably they just pay me by transfer.
And do you have specific invoice terms in terms of how long they have to pay you, or do you expect payment pretty much straight away? Or
oh yeah, by return. Yeah, the work isn't getting booked in until they pay their initial deposit. The work doesn't start if that second staged payment is late. It's quite clear there's no room for manoeuvre on it. I've never had an issue with anybody delaying a payment or changing their minds or anything. I know, again, just from the guys that I know on Twitter, that this has happened to some people.
We'll probably talk about this in a future podcast in a bit more detail, but do you have any sort of contract?
I don't actually. No, I don't have a terms and conditions. I probably should. There are probably lawyers holding their heads in their hands at the moment saying, oh, you desperately should.
Yeah, it's something that's I don't either, and it's something that's nagging at the back of my mind that I should maybe have something that spells out things like even like liability clauses and stuff like that. But yeah, that's on the to-do list for me as well.
Yes, indeed. No, I haven't put that in place. I've looked at it, and they're generally so complicated. And again, it's a bit like, you not wanting to ask some other tradesman what something's costing. Getting a potential client to sign a terms and conditions agreement and withholding your copy of it seems I don't know. It takes it away from being a personal relationship and makes it very much a bit too big businessy for me.
I think you'd have to have it maybe only for jobs over a certain value or particular jobs that involve a high level of risk or whatever. But it's certainly something worth considering. But it's a whole topic in its own right. Then you're getting final payment by transfer or
all payments are mostly by transfer these days.
Do you accept cheque at all?
I'm happy to take it. I can't tell you the last time I took a cheque off somebody. If we have any sort of international or particularly American listeners listening, it's perfectly normal and perfectly reasonable to pay somebody by a bank transfer through an app on your phone, whether that's for a few pounds to split the cost of a meal or many thousands of pounds to pay for this kind of work to be done.
And from what I've heard, we're massively behind the likes of China and Japan, and
particularly in the micro payments is it Weibo or something?
To the point that I've got some Chinese friends who they are baffled by people who carry anything around with them apart from a mobile phone.
Yeah,
they don't carry credit cards ever. They don't carry cash ever. Generally, everything gets done either by some form of Apple Pay through their phone.
Yeah, or WeChat payments is a big thing, isn't it?
Some sort of biometric-based payments and stuff like that. And that will be the next thing that we have to deal with. So we see all sides of it, really, I would say. But yeah, for me, checks are gone completely. I don't accept checks anymore. I can't. My bank won't even accept checks. I've got to post them off to some clearance centre somewhere, and I can't physically go into a branch with them.
Yeah, it's an academic conversation probably because God, I couldn't tell you the last time anybody wrote me a check.
Yeah, I still get the odd customer asking us, and cash isn't so much of a problem because I can bank cash at a post office. My bank isn't through the post office, but I can't bank cash at my bank. They won't accept cash on the business bank account that I've got. Basically a completely online account, and they don't want people with completely online accounts going into their branches and causing queues, and their branches are probably going to shut at some point anyway. They're trying to push everyone down this route of just not relying on the branches. So I can bank cash through a post office. Checks have to be physically posted off to some clearance centre somewhere, which is just a massive pain in the backside. So I only accept transfer and credit cards. So I've got a little iZettle credit card machine. And now I would say 99% is credit or debit card through the iZettle, and that works absolutely brilliantly because it means I can get the payment off the customer straight away. As soon as I don't leave the customer's premises until they've paid me, and then it automatically sends a receipt to the customer, and it just works fantastically. Highly recommend it.
Okay. What are the, not to get too personal, but what are the charges like on that?
It's 30 quid for the machine, and I think off the top of my head it's 1.7% of the total transaction, so it's not huge, and you can absorb that.
You can build that into the quote easily enough, can't you?
Yeah, as long, obviously you're not allowed to now, certainly in the UK, you're not allowed to add on credit card transaction charges anymore, but I'll just make sure it's covered in the price, and that's part of the cost of doing business at the end of the day. But yeah, the machine, honestly, highly recommend it. The machine, 30 quid, and I don't think there's even a contract or anything, and then they just take a small percentage, and 2 or 3 days later the money appears in your bank account.
Interesting. Yeah, I've transfers here in the UK at least are very simple and very straightforward and easy, but obviously there's still that element of trust that you've got to trust the customer to do it, rather than, at least if they're there with their card and they're putting their PIN in, then the funds are going to come through. Yeah,
my problem with transfers, and I've never had anyone not pay me for a job, but I have had people regularly say, "Oh, I'll do it tonight," and then they forget. And then the next night, "Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot, I'll do it tonight." And then they get distracted. And it just adds that level of a little bit of stress of, are they trying to get away without paying me here? Or are they genuinely, they have actually forgotten? It just removes that element of stress by just getting that money off them straight away, because people do forget and they lose their little stupid keypad things that you've got to have for adding new PEs onto their accounts and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. Yeah.
So I don't mind accepting transfers if they're a known customer and they're a known entity and I know they're going to pay me in a reasonable time frame. As soon as I've had to chase someone for a couple of weeks, from that point onwards, they're paying by credit card every time. I'm not leaving until they've paid us, because I hate having to constantly, A, check the bank account to see whether or not they've paid, and B, be phoning them every day or a couple of days saying, "So have you done it yet? And have you done the transfer?" And it's just, I don't like that side of being owed money and the stress of having done a job and worrying about whether or not you're going to get paid for your 2 weeks of blood, sweat and tears.
Have you ever had a bad debt out of interest?
No, not that I can think of. No, genuinely, I've never had a customer not pay me for a job. And generally, if a customer was that dissatisfied with the work that I'd done, I would probably not want to be paid for the job. That sounds a bit like, certainly for smaller work, I would rather continuously go back there and fix the problems for free until they were happy, but only in a situation where it's something that I know that I've not done it right. But that's where having pride in your work, and you and me, we have that work ethos of, you don't leave the site until everything's perfect, because you don't want to be getting that phone call of someone coming back and saying, "Oh, by the way, you forgot to do X, Y, Z." So there should be no reason at the end of a job for someone to renege on the deal. But I guess it certainly can happen, and I have heard of other people where they have had a very small minority of customers who are trying to basically get something for nothing. Have you ever had anything like that?
No, actually, no. Again, in the 18 years or so that I've been doing this, I think fairly early on, when I was doing bits of everything, I did a job it was a phone call out of the blue. It's not in my normal sort of work area, so it was way out, and it was a silly external little bit of painting, and it was one of those horrible things where it was 4 flats into the building and they're all splitting the cost between them. And I initially started dealing with somebody and got passed on to somebody else who was a complete, nitpicking so-and-so. And I put a day's work in there and I just walked away. That was one job that I just walked away from. I said, "Yeah, just not for me. Sorry." So I swallowed the cost on that one. They got a very well prepped front bay window, but that was it. That's all they had out of me. And but no, in terms of actual completed jobs that are proper bad debts, if you like, no, I've never had anything.
And I think really, if you're upfront with everything from square one, you're not building a situation where that can happen. Because you've made it very clear what the job's going to cost. You've talked to them about what the job's going to look like, what the materials are going to be, how long it's going to take. Being upfront about your timescales is so important. because you don't want to be saying, oh yeah, I'll get that done in a couple of weeks, when you know fine well there's no possible way that you can do that for 2 months. And that's the point where the customer's going to start to get a bit antsy and they're going to start looking elsewhere, and then maybe at the last minute they do manage to find someone who can fit them in, and suddenly your job gets cancelled.
Or worse, it goes to somebody else, which is,
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think as long as you're fairly upfront with people from square one, it shouldn't be a problem that you run into. But that's not to say that every customer is a good customer. Certainly the vast majority of people.
Well, I was going to say, no, there are certainly some customers that you don't particularly want to keep.
Yeah, and I've had my fair share of those.
And I've always been prepared to say no to work, no matter how, even if it was in the quietest of quiet times. I've always been prepared to say no. I don't need this enough to deal with what I'd have to deal with to do this job. That certainly helps, I've found anyway.
And I think you just get a feel for those sort of customers over time, don't you? You just kind of get an idea from the type of correspondence that you're getting from square one. Is this a person that you want to be dealing with? And I think that is, if they are being abrupt and slightly rude on their initial communication, what are they going to be like to deal with throughout the job? And generally those sort of people, if I'm getting a very curt text message off someone saying, hiya mate, can you come this Saturday to do ... that probably isn't going to be a job that's going to get much attention from me.
I've declined to quote on a couple of jobs because when I've turned up to do a site visit, turned up at somebody's house, it's utterly squalid, filthy cat mess everywhere, carpets full of fleas, all that sort of stuff.
The type of place that you put dust sheets down to keep your feet clean.
Absolutely. You wash your hands when you leave, not when you go in. No, I don't need that in my life. I just no. It's an eye-opener, isn't it, working in other people's homes.
Have you done much in student flats?
I've done a couple of little bits, and they can be a bit ripe.
I don't want to tar all students with the same brush here, but there's some flats where I've gone in with the landlord at the end of a tenancy or at the end of term, and the students have cleared out, and I've gone in with the landlord knowing that there's going to be a certain amount of maintenance that needs doing. I've seen the landlord in tears at what has happened to their property. Properties that were beautifully done out, brand new kitchens, lovely floors, nice furnishings, and they've been destroyed. They haven't been hoovered for maybe a year. They haven't had part of it I think has to be down to the landlord to be doing periodic inspections and stuff like that. I don't understand how somewhere can get that bad, but oh man, and those sort of jobs.
Yeah, you don't want to be doing them now, do you?
No, not really, no. Although I will try and, if it's a regular landlord and they're a good customer, I will still try and help them out. But
landlords have regular work. That's one of the things that goes in their favour. They with every tenancy change, there's often, if you're doing that kind of work, a little bit of touch-up work on paintwork or as you say, kitchen and bathrooms tend to get their fair share of wear and tear, and there's always something that needs doing when a tenancy agreement ends and before the next one goes in. So what's your kind of workflow then, Andy, when somebody contacts you? What's the normal routine that you go through?
Now everything really revolves around my website, and to be honest, I don't even have a particularly good website. I've got pretty much a holding front page and a contact page with a form on it. And that's more or less it. I still haven't had a chance to put a portfolio of work on my site or anything like that.
I'm ashamed to say I haven't even looked, so I must go and check this out later on.
Don't look, because it's awful. To be fair, I had a different site a little while ago, and I've switched over to a new theme. And when I did that, I basically thought, I'm going to blitz this and just start again. And I kind of put a bit of a holding front page together and a contact page. And it's just sat there, and I need to sort that side of things out, but work's coming in, so I don't really need to put that much effort into that side of things at the minute. But I would say the website, as long as you've got decent SEO and keywords that are going to bring the right people in. So, test your keywords, search for what your customer is likely to be searching for on Google, and not while you're logged into Google, which is a little tip for you as well, because Google will base its search results on what you have historically searched for. So if you are going to be testing Google, try and do it on a browser that you haven't used before, or clear all the cookies and history and all that sort of thing before you do your test searches. And make sure you're not logged into the browser, because then it'll do the search based on a new person who has never searched for that before on that computer, and you'll get a much better idea of the results that a person's going to get, rather than a set of results that are swayed towards your personal search history and things that you are more like, and the stuff that Google can do behind the scenes, where it might even be looking at your emails and all sorts to tailor your search results.
They don't do that, surely.
So yeah, the web side of things is certainly pretty much 95% of where business comes in now. But similar to yourself, when I first started, now the interesting thing is you started 18 years or so ago with a leaflet drop. I started 6 years or so ago with a leaflet drop, and the leaflet drop for me just didn't work very well, although I didn't drop that many leaflets. And what I did for mine, I went to Vistaprint and got a whole load of business cards done, and I got a whole load of flyers done. That back in the day was all for Gosforth Handyman. What I did was I wanted people to have a business card and a flyer. So I used some temporary tack adhesive, which is like a stencil adhesive. You can use like cow gum or something like that. But basically some sort of temporary adhesive, and I glued my business card onto the flyer so that they would get the flyer and the business card. Because otherwise, if you post them both through separately, the business card will get lost and just put in the bin. So I spent ages gluing up thousands of business cards to thousands of flyers, and then went off round all the local streets delivering them. And I did get a certain amount of business from them, but then I went to one particular house, and as I was delivering the leaflet through the letterbox, I felt my hand just get jammed on something. It was like, what's going on there? And as I tried to pull my hand away, I realised that a dog had bitten onto my finger while it was through the letterbox and wasn't letting go. And it was a young Alsatian, and I know this because the police got involved and everything, because there was no barking. If you've got a vicious dog that's going to grab post out the letterbox before it's even hit the floor, I think you need to be putting a cage on your letterbox, And this dog, it had literally bitten right through the first kind of joint of my fourth finger on my right hand, and I'm right-handed. So I had to go to A&E. I had to have the joint washed out. I was in A&E for about 4 or 5 hours because it's not a high priority thing, so you have to join the back of the queue. It was phenomenally painful. It was right through the bone, and yeah, this dog had nearly bitten my finger off. And the problem wasn't so much the pain and associated blood. The problem was that now my right hand was out of action, and I've just delivered goodness knows how many leaflets saying, "Can I do work for you?" And I couldn't do any work because I couldn't even hold a drill for probably 2 to 3 weeks. My right hand was completely bandaged up and out of action, and that was the last leaflet I delivered. So, but as I say, the police got involved because they went down and had a word with them. Because what if it had been a kid delivering Christmas cards? If it had been a child's finger, their fingers would have been completely clean through. There was no barking or anything. It literally, I put my hand through, and I thought it had got caught on something. I thought it got caught on the edge of the letterbox, and it was only when I started trying to pull my hand back that I heard the growling, and it was like, there's a dog attached to the end of my hand. What do you do? There was just blood going up. Oh man. Anyway, leaflets for me, I got a couple of leads. I got a couple of leads from the leaflets, but they didn't work particularly well for me. I think because when I was doing it, we're into the Facebook generation of people more looking online for stuff. But what I did do, I put a small advert in one of the little local leaflets that go door to door. Up this way, it's called Right Up Your Street.
Yeah, I know the type. Yeah, that's right. A4 folded, half a dozen pages, full of local gossip and estate agents' adverts.
Yep, I put one advert in that. It cost me, I think off the top of my head, about 65 quid for a quarter-page advert. That is the only advert that I have paid in the entire life of my business. And that generated more business than I could handle, to the point that when it was like a quarterly publication, this I think, and when it came to the next 3-month period and they got in touch saying, do you want to renew your advert, I just said, I can't. I've got more business coming in from that one advert that I placed than I can handle, and I just had to say, look, put it on hold for now, and I'll be back in touch when this work dries up. And that work never dried up.
That was 65 quid well spent, wasn't it?
It was a very well spent 65 quid. And it's something I'm still deliberating now of going back into those sort of publications to promote higher end stuff. Because, you know, not everyone's on Facebook, not everyone's on the internet. There's a lot of people out there with money to spend who use those sort of little directories that come round as their source of where to find people to do particular jobs.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
And they work really, really well. I've briefly said about the Facebook thing, I think, last week. For me, Facebook is now completely gone. I still have my pages out there, but I don't use Facebook anymore.
I've only just started using Facebook, and when I say using, I'm on a couple of Facebook groups. I don't really understand it. I've got a. This is an old man speaking now. Who are all these people who want to be my friends? I don't get it. It's a bit of a baffling mystery to me. I'm on a couple of Facebook groups which are very sort of specific, bit like forums used to be back in the day. The idea of actually going on Facebook to promote my business, I don't understand why anybody would do that. I don't get it.
Well, when Facebook pages, and if you're not familiar, Facebook predominantly revolves around, you've either got a user account, as in you're a person who logs onto Facebook, or you've got a business account where you have a page on Facebook. And when Facebook pages first started up, if you posted something to your page to say, this is my joinery business, this is what I do, blah, 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 everyone who liked that page would generally get to see your post that you'd posted, and it would show up in their timeline along with everything else that they saw from their friends in their timeline. And that worked really, really well. And that was probably about 5 or 6 years ago that it was like that, where if you liked a page, you would see the stuff from the person who you'd liked the page of. Now, there's so much advertising on Facebook, and there's so many pages, and there's so many groups as well, because now we've obviously got Facebook groups to deal with as well. There's so much stuff getting bombarded at people through the timelines. The chances of you posting something to your page and people actually seeing it is, you know, you're looking in the 1 to 2%, maybe less. So if you've got 100 people liking your page, you might get one person who sees your post. So the likelihood is no one who's looking to get any work done from you is going to see your business post, unless you pay to get it promoted. Which
is interesting, because 1 to 2% is fairly typical response rate for direct advertising. So it's interesting that's sort of Facebook's sort of been reduced to that sort of level, you know.
Yeah, which is a real shame, because these are people who have said that they want to hear about your business. And that's where it's gone into the metrics of direct advertising, where 1 to 2% might get in touch from a magazine advert or something like that. But these are people who have said, I like your business. I want to know everything about your business because I've liked your page and I've said that I want to support your business. It'd be very interesting to see where Facebook go with this, because the last that I've heard is that Facebook are going to strip page advertising completely out of people's news feeds. And that means that page advertising is completely pointless. It's going to reduce that 1% even lower and lower and lower. And effectively what they've said is that and it's all in discussion at the minute. I don't think any of this has gone live yet. I don't know. I haven't been on Facebook for nearly 3 months. But what they've said is that they're going to effectively have a timeline of you and your friends, and then you're going to have a separate timeline of all your pages that you like. Well, obviously, no one's going to go onto the separate timeline of all the pages you like. Everyone's going to do it for the social aspect. That's the point of social media. So your advert's just going to get lost in a realm of all these pages that people like, in a tab that people aren't going to even click on. Maybe it won't end up working like that, but that's kind of the suspicion so far is this is the route that Facebook are going to go down. I've also had problems with Facebook's paid advertising in the past, not through my joinery side of things, but through the drumming side of things, where I did pay for some Facebook sponsored advertising, and the quality of the likes that I got on my page were very low. But, you know, they might turn it around. Who's to say where it ends up in a year's time? It'd be very interesting to follow up on this time next year and see where Facebook ends up. But I wouldn't personally have any concerns about not being on it, Peter.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. You know, like me, an awful lot of people don't use Facebook or find it a baffling mess. So advertising through traditional means is probably a fairly sort of sensible way going forwards. Especially if it's that cheap.
Yeah, and I think that's the most frustrating thing about Facebook is that they have the most powerful targeted advertising platform on the planet. No one can touch Facebook in terms of how you can create an advert and target it to a specific set of people. You can go to the point of saying, I want my target to only show to this postcode area. You can even draw a shape on a map, I think, and you can say, I only want it to go to these houses, to people of a certain age range. Say, for example, you made Art Deco furniture. That's just in my mind at the minute. You could target people who just like Art Deco furniture. You know, there's nothing else on the planet where you can target your marketing to that degree. So it's such a shame. I don't know. They're just not getting my vote at the minute, but it frustrates me.
No way, really. I would never have guessed that, Andy.
Yeah, I know. Well, how long have I been ranting on? I could keep going for quite a while about Facebook, but it frustrates me because it is such a powerful platform, and I'm not saying if you're setting up a brand new joinery business now, there's probably no better route to go down. Other than maybe the adverts in your local A5 leaflet things that we talked about. But Facebook is probably going to be your best route to go down. I hate to say it, but if you're going to pay to boost your adverts, that's probably still the best route to go down. But I've very rapidly fallen out of love with Facebook, I'm afraid.
What about things like Pinterest? Do you get involved in that at all to drive traffic to your website? Or
Pinterest is a very interesting one. I think Pinterest is going to grow massively over the next couple of years. I am on Pinterest, but I don't use it very often. I've only set up an account on there a couple of months ago. I think making your website Pinterest friendly is a very sensible route to go down. So making sure that you have plenty of images and stuff that can be pinned on Pinterest. Yeah, I think Pinterest is fantastic.
Yeah. Again, it's an area that I know absolutely nothing about, and I don't have a Pinterest account, so thanks Pinterest, I can't even go and look at it without registering. So far, that's been a complete turn-off for me, so I just can't be bothered with it right now. But I'm curious. I know there are people who use it to drive traffic to their websites and then through social media to promote and help their businesses, especially in the sort of beauty blogger, fashion style businesses in that sort of sector.
I think it's very interesting to see where these technologies are going over the next couple of years, and generally stuff that happens in the States tends to happen here 2 to 5 years later. And I've seen businesses launched and turned into huge operations purely on the back of Instagram. If you follow the Protractor podcast, have a listen to some of the CEOs of construction companies and firms who have developed an Instagram model that just creates enormous amounts of business for them. And this, we're not talking about small jobs here. We're talking about house builders, construction firms, people who do giant remodeling jobs, and they're getting 99% of the business through Instagram. I think Instagram and Pinterest are two very interesting platforms to watch over the next couple of years. I think it's certainly something, if I was setting up a new joinery business now, I would want to make sure, A good website, B, presence on Instagram, and C, a presence on Pinterest. To me, those would be the top 3 priorities. Everything else, Facebook, Twitter, other stuff that I don't understand, that to me would be very, very secondary at the minute. Certain things work well for certain types of businesses, and you've got to just try it and see what works, and for me, the website alone and having decent SEO and people being able to just... Oh, and one other area that we've not touched on, by the way, it kind of links in with the website side of things, but Google Places and Google My Business is another key area that I seem to get quite a lot of, because I do have, you know, where you can put your business on Google Maps or whatever. I'm not sure. It's very confusing how it works, because it's one of these things that Google seems to have just kind of hashed together.
It's almost completely opaque. I don't get how I am there, sort of, kind of. You know, on a personal level, I don't really want people turning up at my workshop, because it's not, you know, it's not publicly accessible.
You can do it without your address being shown. I have it set up so that I've effectively got a pin in the middle of Gosforth. I've said I'll accept business from like a 3-mile radius or something. But even that's not accurate, because there's areas that I cover that are well outside that. But that kind of gives us a kind of targeted area on the Google Maps thing. But you can do it where you don't publish your address, which I would highly recommend, obviously. But I do get quite a lot of business through that. So I would certainly look into the Google, I think it's called Google My Business, but it keeps changing. There's Google Maps, and there's Google Places, and there's Google My Business, and it's all kind of, the way that they talk to each other is horrible. And you end up with like multiple, because it all hangs around Google Plus, which is obviously a failed social media platform. The way these all interact with each other, especially if you've also got a YouTube channel, which has its own associated Google Plus account, it makes me very nervous when I want to change something on, for example, Google Places, and it looks like it's going to change something on my YouTube channel. And it's like, no, don't touch my YouTube channel. Please leave my YouTube channel alone. All I want to do is change a logo on Google Places or whatever. The way it integrates is horrible, but it does actually work quite well, because it means that, you know, anyone searching on Google for a joiner, I think one of the first things that pops up is results from Google Maps and what's near you. So yeah, so from my side, I did, as I say, the leaflet drop, got bitten by a dog, not doing that again. Did the magazine advert little quarter page thing, that worked really, really well. And now web and SEO, I would say, are the... SEO, by the way, just kind of drop that in, assuming everyone knows what SEO is, but that's search engine optimization. And it just means having a website that's search engine friendly at the end of the day, that the thing that you sell comes up on searches.
Yeah, that's a black art in itself, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think we've probably blethered on enough about the business side of things for today, but I think it's opened up a whole load of other topics.
I guess the short answer is keeping customers happy is relatively straightforward by, you know, doing a decent job and being open and communicative and straight with people. That certainly seems to work for me. It's almost like the carpentry, the joinery, the cabinet making, whatever else is secondary. It's like, you know, you've got to do a nice job. It's got to look good, and it's got to last well.
People buy from people. The key thing that you always need to have in the back of your mind is that if you're pleasurable to deal, you know, would you buy from you? and you need to have that mindset when you deal with customers, that if you are a pain in the backside to deal with and no one can ever get hold of you, and you don't turn up when you said you were going to turn up, and you can't give people a price, and it's generally not a very pleasant experience to have that business transaction, then you're probably going to have a little bit of a rethink of the model that you're using. But as you say, turn up, do the job, obviously make sure your pricing is accurate, and you get back to people, and you're just generally a decent human being to people, and you'll find that work, you know, reputation spreads very, very quickly.
Yes, and in a similar vein, you know, if you get a bad reputation, that can spread pretty quickly too. So it's the old joke about, you know, somebody who is happy with what you've done will tell one other person, and somebody who's unhappy with what you've done will tell 10. So, you know, always ever vigilant and conscientious about the work that we do, of course. And really, that's all you can do. Sort the pricing out, do a good job, be open and straight with the clients, and fingers crossed they'll be the same with you.
Yeah, I think if you have pride in your work, and that's not just, as you're saying, not just the end product of what you're building, but pride in your work from beginning to end of the process of dealing with the customer, from the second that they make their first communication with you through to them paying you at the end of the day. And if you have pride in all of that work, you will do well.
What else have we been doing this week? Have you had any time to listen to any other podcasts or watch any YouTube?
I'm still ploughing through the back catalogue of Hello Internet podcasts at the minute, which I discovered a couple of months ago. I can't remember. So I'm trying desperately to get caught up on those because they've done about 100 episodes or so. And I started listening. You know, it's one of those things. What order do you listen podcasts in when you've discovered a new podcast?
The order they were made. The order they were made. You've got to go back to the start.
Yeah, exactly. But you often discover it on like a recent one. So you'll discover a podcast and listen to maybe episode 95, and then it'll be like, oh, this is quite good. I'll listen. And then your podcast player will automatically go and play episode 94, and then you'll just leave it go and it'll do episode 93. And then you suddenly realise, hold on a minute, I'm listening to all these in-jokes that make no sense because I haven't listened to episodes 1 to 92. Yeah. So you need to catch up. So I'm currently, as far as I'm concerned, it's March 2015.
Nice.
So I've got about 3 years of podcasts to get through on Hello Internet. So I'm binge listening that at the minute. What about yourself?
I think I mentioned last week, since I've started doing the YouTube stuff, because I'm usually, shooting video in the workshop while I'm building things, I'm kind of lost touch with a lot of the podcasts that I listen to. Most of them are sort of on the techie side. But one that's popped up recently, I know you mentioned through your Instagram, Fools with Tools podcast. I'm working my way through the back catalogue of that. That's good fun.
They're awesome.
But one which isn't about making stuff, it's on the techie side. It's called The Menu Bar, which is interesting. This was a podcast that was out, I think, about 3 years ago. They did a year of it, and then it's lapsed for a couple of years. And now these two guys are back on, and they've got a guest every week. And obviously the show, how entertaining the show is depends on the guest to a large extent. And because it's a relatively new series, there's only half a dozen or so shows to go through so far. So yeah, I'm having to listen to that one, and it's good stuff.
Awesome stuff. I'll check it out. We'll put links in the show notes to all of those things that we've talked about and anything else that we've talked about as well. I think we can probably wrap up for this week, unless there's anything else.
I don't think so. I think we've probably covered enough about getting the work and keeping the customers. Where can people find you, Andy?
So I'm at Gosforth Handyman on YouTube or gosforthhandyman.com.
I am Peter Millard of 10minuteworkshop.tv. Will take you straight to my YouTube channel. Or if you want to talk to me about carrying out actual jobby job type work, then go to petermillard.com, and all the links and phone numbers in my case are all on the website there. You'll be able to find me straight through there.
And obviously we still haven't quite decided how we're going to be taking feedback on these podcasts. I think for the minute, should we say Twitter?
Yes, Twitter's probably the easiest way to go because it's all set up and ready to go. It is Measuring Up PC on Twitter. Thank you, Twitter, for the 15-character username limit. That's really, really useful.
Yeah, tell us about it. I have to be Gosforth Andy on Twitter for Gosforth Handyman because I can't fit Gosforth Handyman in. You can subscribe to the podcast, and the podcast website for show notes and all that sort of thing is measuringuppodcast.com. Please also give us a review on iTunes. That'll really help us get this podcast off the ground. We've got so much more stuff that I want to talk to you about the business side of running a joinery or carpentry business. There's many, many more things that we're going to be going into on this podcast. So please give us a nice review on iTunes. That'll help us kind of publicise the whole thing. And if you feel especially generous, you can follow us on Patreon and support us on there as well.
It is Measuring Up Podcast on Patreon, patreon.com/Measuring Up Podcast. And that's it for this week, I think. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure to have you with us, a pleasure to have your company. Andy, great having a chat, as always. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Catch up next time.